Right. What I'd like to do right now is if you have the PowerPoint ready within 1 or 2 minutes, let me know. We'll do the PowerPoint, and then after the PowerPoint, we will go into everything else. All right. Awesome. All right, so go to the next slide, please. All right, so this right here is the first garden I planted at Evergreen Brickworks. Like I said, it is me trying to figure out if the ground was contaminated, so I planted sunflowers. Those are sunflower mounds I planted there, just to see what was going on with the soil and seeing what I can and cannot do at Evergreen Brickworks. Come to find out, I could do a lot at Evergreen Brickworks. All right, next slide, please. So this ground right here. So if you ever go to Evergreen Brickworks, the west parking lot off of Bayview, and also the exit by the dog park, this little area is on the west side. This is what it looked like when I first started. It was taken over by brambles, by plants behaving badly. There are sometimes trees left inside there. I was like, oh, this looks nice. And then one day, the facilities person said, can you do something here? And I said, yes, I can. Next slide, please. So it's another part of it. This is when there was a teepee put up as well. Next slide, please. So this is what that spot looks like now. That area that you saw on one of the first slides, where you saw one of my volunteers with the wheelbarrow, this is what we did to it. Well, actually, this is what I did to it. My dreams. This came to fruition because we had a funder who loved the gardens that I did at Evergreen Brickworks and wanted to know if I could plant 6 gardens for the funder for a lot of money. And I said, yes, we can. This will just allow me to do what I do, and always allow me to have an Indigenous connection to it. And they said, sure, you do what you do best. So that space I turned into a place. And this place has beehives at the side of it. This area has become it is the Indigenous garden of Brickworks. It has become the area where where you see the teepee at. We now do ceremonies on site there. There's been naming ceremonies, sweat lodge ceremonies. That area has become very, very special to a lot of the Indigenous communities, especially for me, because all the Indigenous elders and medicine keepers that I've ever met at Brickworks, I always met them when I was in that garden. They all said the same thing. There's something special about this area. I said, yes, that's why I'm here. All I want to do is uncover it. So I've been working on it and doing what I got to do with it. Next slide, please. So this is one of my garden areas at Brickworks. You'll see 2 types of tobacco growing there. The longer tobacco on, well, let's say the right hand of the screen, that is Virginia tobacco. On the left side of the screen is the Hopi traditional tobacco. So I grow tobacco at Brickworks, sweetgrass. We have a medicine garden. I have plans to grow 4 more medicine gardens, even a bigger one. I grow a lot of stuff at Brickworks. Next slide, please. So this is just me with clay pot, terracotta clay pot irrigation, which I'm going to talk about very, very soon. This little thing right here, this clay pot irrigation, I'm going to tell you right now, is going to help you a lot when it comes to climate change, gardening, and our very, very hot summers. Next slide, please. This is just me showing people how to dry your pumpkins or your squashes in rings. I just put it up. You'll just see the flag of peace, my grandfather's cowboy hat, rings of squash, and way behind there you'll see a dream catcher that was woven. Next slide, please. So these tomatoes, traveler tomatoes. These tomatoes, I don't know if anybody remembers. Remember when I won first place for these tomatoes way back when? And then somebody asked me, this first place for best tasting tomato, I believe. And somebody asked me if did I like to taste, and I said, no, I don't eat raw tomatoes. I think you're disgusting. But I do grow them. So these tomatoes right here are called traveler tomatoes. These are actually a very, very ancient ancient tomato that I found out a couple weeks ago. So they originate from Peru. They've always eaten in Peru. Then the Mayans, the Aztecs, they've taken over as well. These tomatoes apparently are very good tasting, high in acid. As for me, I don't eat them, but they grow like a bunch of grape tomatoes. So the whole idea is that they're traveler tomatoes. So remember, we have the regular, if I can speak of grape, the tomatoes we eat now, they're oblong. So think about, you have a group of people, you cut it and try to give them a slice of tomato. It's floppy, it's everywhere, blah, water everywhere, seeds everywhere, smell, gross. These tomatoes, because they grow like a group of tomatoes, like a bunch of grapes, all you do when you want to pass it to give people a tomato is you take one and you break it off. And there's your tomato. Break another piece off. There's your tomato. Next slide, please. All right, so this right here, what you need to, the reason why I'm showing this is that at Evergreen Brickworks, what I do, one of my major things to do is to reconnect the indigenous, especially the urban indigenous community and non-indigenous community with our traditional foods. This is the flower of groundnut, Apios americana. So this is what you'll find, this plant you would find on the riverbanks for erosion control. It is edible. The tubers are edible. It has long beans that are edible. It's a beautiful plant. It vines, very beautiful, beautiful flowers, but it is part of the carrion flower family, so it does have a weird like smell to it. But it's beautiful to grow in a garden. What I'm trying to get people to do, if you buy riverbanks that have really bad erosion, traditionally you would find these around the riverbanks, helping to hold the riverbanks up. So maybe the city of Toronto, if there's anybody from the city of Toronto on here, maybe you want to consider planting those along our riverbanks. Just a thought. Next slide, please. All right, so here goes to the other farm, the University of Toronto Scarborough Farm campus. I was approached by the Riverbanks flower is ground nut, so GROUNDNUT. Not people will think it's going to be a peanut. It is not. It's also called Apios americana. All right. So University of Toronto Scarborough campus, I started there last year. I was approached by Professor Danny LaFond. I was just, thank you, Rhonda. I was part of a group that I honestly forgot that I was part of. And then during this group, this message comes up. Hey, Isaac, my name is Danny LaFond. I met a couple of your cousins. I really want to work with you. I was like, perfect, let's work together. Walked in blindly and met this phenomenal sentient being with these phenomenal students. And so this is the beginning of the University of Scarborough Farm campus. We did it during the COVID last year. 2 students, Simon and Alexis, they worked alongside me and I showed them what I know. Next slide, please. So that's the ground, part of the ground of the beginning of the farm, the garden at the University of Farm, the farm campus at Scarborough University of Toronto. Geez, why do I get that wrong all the time? That's the beginning. I will tell you this right now. That ground up there, clay and pebbles across the board. Clay and pebbles with lots and lots of poison ivy. And when I mean lots of poison ivy, I mean lots of poison ivy. I've never seen so much. I've never ever seen so much poison ivy in my life, right? So we had to, I had to figure out how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this up here? So we did mounds, and then we had to somehow build a fence along the side of it, because when we were building it, we realized that there's a lot of deer that come through there, a lot of ducks that come through there, but they were eating all the seedlings. We had to sort of block them out. So that's the beginning of what it looks like. Next slide, please. So I decided to teach the students how to build mounds, traditional mounds. These mounds that are this small are mounds that are seasonal mounds. Bigger mounds that are larger are well, how do I say that? I call longevity mounds, if you want to call them. They're there for more than 1 year, right? So just started a mound building. Next slide, please. So there it is. This is what we came up with. So we had about 7 mounds. We had the pots along the side of it. We were growing sunflowers in. We had an area for beans. So we had all this stuff starting to grow. We put mulch around the ground of it, make it look nice and pretty. Next slide, please. So here's me and my crew. So this crew right here, like I said, there's Alexis to my right, Simon, who's next to me in the blue, and Professor Danny. That is us standing and being happy and proud that we did this work. And I'll tell you this right now, I put them to work and they loved it. Next slide, please. That's Simon and Alexis doing planting as well. Next slide. So these are the container beds that we have there. So the container beds we had, we planted prairie sage. There's always wild strawberries already planted there, tobacco and sweet grass to be planted as well. Next slide. So here is sweetgrass growing. We put it in the containers and I want to grow on the ground. So what you'll see, the dots there is clay pot irrigation, which I will get to in a minute, and why you will need that in your gardens due to this climate change. You have to know that when you're planting sweetgrass needs damp soil, like a marshy area. It can't be in dry soil, whereas sage needs that dry soil. So by adding clay pot irrigation to where your sweetgrass is, it'll always keep your soil nice and damp. Next slide, please. This is Simon and Alexis. I'm showing them how to plant sweetgrass with the clay pots. Next slide. We're almost done. So this is what the garden was looking like. Everything's all lush compared to the very first picture I showed you of the garden. Using mounds, using traditional mounds to grow above the soil. So this will spread the mounds out to replenish that soil that's there, but using mounds and to grow. Next slide. All right, so this is the last of the slides. This is something that growing up, I always saw on one of the telephone poles going uptown. We never call it, well, we're from the country. Where the stores were, that was uptown. That's what we called it. So on one of the telephone poles, there's always a sign that said, if you ate today, thank a farmer. And then I saw that on a bag. And that's a produce I grew at Brickworks. And that's a part of the PowerPoint. Let's get rid of this PowerPoint so we can start talking more. So you saw things in this PowerPoint. Thank you very much, Rhonda, for the PowerPoint, for doing the PowerPoint. I think that was Rhonda was doing it. When it comes to everyone, most people want to talk about or learn about clay pot irrigation, right? Clay pot irrigation. So clay pots, we used to dig down, like I said earlier, I had a grandfather who was a clay artist, digging down when they're building their homes, taking the clay out of the earth and making these clay. I love it. So making the clay. So we used to make our own clay pots and fire them and put them in the soil. I remember doing that with my grandfathers growing up. And then remember all of a sudden everything just changed. Let's not dig in the soil anymore. Let's actually use terracotta pots. So terracotta pots would do the same thing. What it is that terracotta pots when they're unglazed, this is already a finished product. When they are unglazed, they are permeable, which means that the water which you put inside here can slowly start to leach out. So what we do is that we would take 2 terracotta pots. One's gonna be the top, one's gonna be the bottom, right? The one that's gonna be the bottom is gonna have the hole inside, because they both have holes. You cover one hole with cork. I use cork and Gorilla Glue because Gorilla Glue is supposed to be environmentally friendly. You can use weld bond glue if you want to, that the plumbers use. It's for water. Make sure one of these holes is plugged, right? Because that hole it's going to be what goes directly in the ground. And once you have that glued, put glue around the rim. So you put glue around the rim, and you stick the 2 together, like that, okay? Now you have your 2 terracotta pots. This is a small one I made for houseplants, right? Can you see that? There you go. The 2 terracotta pots, right? This is the top. As you can see inside there, there's nothing covered, so the hole's open. As the bottom part goes in the earth, the hole is closed. What you can do now is take this. This goes directly into the soil. Keep about an inch above the soil so you can see it. All right. My grandmother used to paint this with white or pink so she can actually see it in the garden. Once it's in the soil comes all the way up to here. Take your water, pour your water directly into that top hole. All right. The water goes directly inside there. You fill the whole thing up. Make sure you have some sort of topper to put on top of it to cover the hole. If you don't cover this hole, it's all going to evaporate from that hole. And what's going to happen once the water's inside here, if your soil is dry, the water is going to slowly start to leach into the soil to moisten your soil, to dampen your soil. If your soil is damp already, the water is going to stay inside of here. What happens is that we allow the plants with their roots to drink when they want to drink, when they need to drink. Instead of us pouring water, forcing them to drink. Here, take this water. Whoa, pour water on top of you. This right here, the roots are down there. They drink when they need to drink. They could be constantly drinking or just taking sips. Who knows, right? But this right here is going to save you when it comes to watering, because you know where your water is going to, you know where your water is coming from, and you know exactly how much water you are using. If you see the plants behind me, the green screen behind me with the plants on, that's from Evergreen Brickworks. All these plants, you'll see the corn, they come with their own clay pot irrigation. People ask me every single year when they see the corn, wow, your corn's huge, or your garden's so bountiful, so green, so lush. How do you keep it lush during all these hot seasons? I go, clay pot irrigation. That's what I do. That's my thing. That's my jam. That's my people's jam. You also don't have to use 2 clay pots. You can use the top clay pot and the saucer. All right. So take the saucer part that fits around the rim of the clay pot, glue that to the top of the rim of the clay pot. The hole's open. That thing goes directly into the ground. All right. Especially do this around your heavy feeders, corn, beans, corn, squash, tomatoes, gourds, your heavy feeders. This would be your great friend. You can even put liquid fertilizer inside there as well. So what I use to glue the pots, I'll do right now. This one here, I use Gorilla Glue that said it was environmentally friendly. You can probably find better environmentally friendly glue out there. This is gonna be your best friend. Actually, I had one of my volunteers 1 year, 2 years, no, 3 years ago. No, hold on. 2 years ago, we just started COVID. So 4 years ago, let's put it that way. Her father was having problems on her farm with watering, and she didn't know what to do. And so I said, hey, I'll teach you about this method right here. She was very skeptical at first. And then she went home, told her father about it. They did it. She came back a month later and said, oh my goodness, Isaac, that works. I said, yeah, it works. My people have been doing this for a very, very long time. So we know what works when it comes to gardening. But I just want people to take this knowledge and take it home with them and to use it, especially during this time of climate change, right? I mean, so much things we can do. One thing I like to do, if I can find my flowers, they're not here. Another fun thing I like to do in the gardens is, especially when you're doing your harvesting part and you're growing like this corn right here that grew in the garden. You can see that corn, la la la, corn, is take the corn husks, the corn leaves, and make flowers out of it. So you have your corn, your dry corn, your corn husk, corn flour, corn leaf, fold it over like this, and just wrap it over. Yeah, so I see people talk about the clay pots. So the clay pots, when it comes to the hole up here, get a rock, get a piece of wood, or maybe you have a pretty stopper, that like some sort of stopper that has a pretty figurine on top of it. You just place it inside there. You need to cover this hole. If you do not cover this hole, the water is going to evaporate on you. Ooh, pine resin. Ooh, I like that. That would be so traditional. Repurposed styrofoam can do that as well. You can also do this with plastic bottles if you want to use plastic. So make sure your plastic bottles are BPA free or BPF free or whatever that chemical is inside there. But at the same time, they're now saying that anything inside of plastic is actually the chemicals leach inside it anyway. So try to find your way as well. Just know that if you're using plastic bottles, the plastic does not leach. It stays in there, and the water just comes out fast.